Hello, this is Frank Allen. This is Unit 4, Exam Review Part 2, continuing with a review of the questions that appeared on the exam, and this is for people who may wish to retake it. Going over number 10, which statement about IMFs is true? Once again, you must thoroughly know the information found in the IMFs video. You must know the 4 IMFs, you must know how to determine them, what their relationship is with melting point and boiling point. So I encourage you to go back and look at that video if you're not sure. Which statement about IMFs is true? And I also encourage you to pause the button at each question so that you can try to attempt to answer it and see if you're correct. More positive and negative ends create weaker IMFs. That's false. The more positive and negative the ends are, the stronger the IMF. We talked about magnets before. Polar forces create stronger IMFs than ionic forces. That's false. Ionic forces are the stronger. Less positive and negative ends create lower melting point and boiling points. That is correct. More positive and negative ends create lower melting point and boiling points. That's false. The more positive and negative the ends are, the stronger the IMF, the higher the boiling point and the melting point. That is the basic concept of the chapter. 11. What is the symmetry and polarity of this molecule? Polarity. Polar means it's unequal, uneven on different sides or on opposite sides. Symmetrical means it's the same on each side. So symmetry and nonpolar kind of go together most of the time. So if you're looking at this molecule, this is symmetrical and nonpolar. An example of a molecule that is not symmetrical would be outside atoms are not all the same. So that is not symmetrical, and that would be polar. So asymmetrical and polar kind of go together for the most part. Number 12, which molecule or substance has the lowest melting point, boiling point? See the board for Lewis structures. So you'd have to look at the board to determine what type of IMFs these three things have. This is ionic. It's a metal and a nonmetal, so it's going to have the highest melting point and boiling point. This is going to be nonpolar, this is going to be polar, this is going to be polar and hydrogen forces. And if you looked at the board, these would be drawn for you. So you have H2O, SiO, and the P2 molecule, and NaCl is ionic. So nonpolar has the lowest melting point. This would be the next lowest, this would be the second highest because you've got both of these forces, and then this would be the highest. So you have to know those IMFs very well. The correct Lewis structure for HCl is, and so for your Lewis structure rules, you have to determine the number of valence electrons, and everybody wants an octet except for hydrogen. It wants 2. Hydrogen's in group 1. Chlorine's in group 7, so you can only show 8 valence electrons. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That rules that one out. Also, hydrogen has 4 electrons around it. Chlorine has 10 electrons around it. Everybody wants 8. Hydrogen wants 2. This hydrogen atom has 8 electrons around it, and the total number of electrons for the structure is 8, so both of those rule that out. Here this one has 4 electrons around it. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. It's showing 10 electrons instead of showing the 8 electrons, so that rules that out. Here hydrogen has 2 electrons around it with the bond. Chlorine has 2, 4, 6, 8 around it, so that's the correct answer. 14. Substances that have the highest melting point, boiling point are ionic. That's fairly simple and straightforward. A water molecule can be described as, and you would need to look on the board for the Lewis structure. It's not ionic. This is a metal, these are 2 nonmetals, hydrogen and oxygen, so anything with ionic is automatically out. It's going to be covalent and polar. The fact that you have electrons on the middle atom make it polar, and again, you have to know the rules about IMFs, what they are, what makes them polar, what makes them nonpolar, what makes them ionic, hydrogen forces. Go back and watch the video. over IMFs. So the correct answer is going to be covalent and polar. Which is the true statement? Nitrogen is a metal. Looking at the periodic table, you would see that it's on the non-metal side. Most atoms want 8 electrons around them. That's probably true, so we can circle that. Hydrogen is a metal. That's false. It's a non-metal. Noble gases form ionic compounds with metals. That's false. Noble gases don't form ionic compounds with hardly anything. What is the molecular shape of CH4? Here you're given this. This has 4 outside atoms, so that's tetrahedral. Tetra means 4 in science. Again, you need to go look at the video that covers shapes. How many valence electrons does this particular molecule have? CH2O. You have 4 there, 1 from each hydrogen, 6 there, so that's 12. Which of the following compounds has the strongest IMFs? You would look at the board, but you really don't need to do that. This is the only ionic compound. This has polar IMFs, this has nonpolar IMFs, and this has polar and hydrogen forces. So this is the strongest, the next weakest, and the weakest. Describe the relationship between IMFs and melting point. Very simple statement. The stronger the IMF, the higher the melting point. That's all you have to write. Identify each shape. 3 outside atoms, that's trigonal. 3 outside atoms, that's trigonal, but this one doesn't have any electrons in the middle. This does. These electrons push these away. That makes it trigonal pyramid. This is trigonal planar. 4 outside atoms, that's tetrahedral. The last section, why are the molecular shapes linear and bent different from each other? Bent has electrons in the middle atom which will repel